One of the biggest problems in grappling is the lack of understanding of how chokes actually work. First off, very few chokes block the airways. Nearly all chokes are blood chokes, which means that they restrict blood flow to the brain. The lack of understanding on how to actually block off blood flow to the brain leads to unnecessary movements and neck cranks to get the tap. Proper choking mechanics are essential to hit clean chokes that are all choke and no crank. There's a hard part of the neck, which is muscle, and a soft part of the neck where the carotid artery is located. Putting pressure on the hard part of the neck will just cause pain. Putting pressure on the soft part of the neck will block off blood flow to the brain. The most important aspect of choking mechanics is the choke bite. You can use multiple parts of your body to choke your opponent, and with whatever you use to do so, you should picture like cutting with scissors. Just like when you cut anything with scissors, you need the pivot point as close to the object as possible. It's the same for chokes. For example, this is a weak choke bite because there's a gap between the pivot point and the neck. And this is a strong choke bite where there's no gap between the pivot point and the neck. To put someone to sleep, you primarily only need to block off one carotid artery. Blocking off the second one helps, but it's not as important as focusing on one carotid artery. All your focus should be on maximizing the pressure on one side of the neck. In fact, you can put someone to sleep by blocking off only one side. I've tested this on myself and here on my friend Mike. The pressure is going to go to one side. This side's untouched. And then we just put pressure. Exactly. So if I were to keep going, Mike, you all right?
Yep.
Exactly. Mike's tough. If we were to keep going, Mike would go to sleep.
I was halfway there.
As you can see, there's nothing blocking off Mike's right carotid artery, but the force generated from my legs on the left side is enough to block off blood flow to the brain and start putting him to sleep. I'm not saying that blocking off the second carotid artery doesn't help or isn't important. What I'm saying is that you should concentrate on generating force on one side primarily and the other side secondary. For example, in a triangle, your hamstring blocks off one side primarily, and their shoulder blocks off one side secondary. The rear naked choke is another great example. The traditional way of finishing, you block off both sides equally, but the modern and more effective way is to rotate your elbow as if you're trying to bring your elbow behind your opponent. This generates more pressure on one side primarily, rather than both sides equally. To properly block off blood flow to the brain, you need a strong choke bite. Back to the scissor analogy, it's not just one blade going up or one blade going down, it's one blade going up and one blade going down. The scissor blade on the bottom of my neck pushes into the carotid artery. The second scissor blade pushes down, it pushes the neck into the bottom scissor. We'll first look at the triangle choke to demonstrate these concepts, but all these concepts apply to every choke. For the triangle, the neck is positioned between the hamstring and the calf. When you squeeze, your hamstring and calf are pressing into each other. Most of the work is being done by the top blade, pushing the neck down into the bottom blade. They come together like scissors. The closer the neck is positioned to the pivot point, meaning the inside crook of your knee, the more pressure is applied. If there's a gap between the neck and the inside of the knee, then the pivot point will be positioned incorrectly. The pivot point needs to be positioned correctly to maximize pressure for any choke, as the pressure needs to go somewhere and you need it on the carotid artery. The angle of the pivot point is always crucial. The reason a triangle is harder to finish when your opponent's shoulder is showing is that their back is in the way of pressing your calf and hamstring together. By changing the angle of the pivot point, the back is no longer in the way and force will be applied to the neck. Frames can also get in the way of bringing your calf and hamstring together, as it pushes against you to keep your calf and hamstring from coming together. While it is possible to still generate enough pressure when your opponent's shoulder is showing or framing against you, it'll require more strength. Ideally, you want neither in the way of your scissors coming together. Many people mistakenly think that you need to pull the head down in a triangle, but what you're actually doing is pulling the head in the direction of the hamstring to generate more force into the bottom scissor. I also like to grab my shin and use my forearm for the same purpose. You can apply the scissors concept of one side going up and one side going down to gi chokes as well. For example, in a bow and arrow choke, You're pulling the lapel to force your wrist into the carotid artery, and with your legs and hips, you push into your opponent to force their carotid artery into your wrist. It's the same with a loop choke. You pull the lapel to force your wrist into the carotid artery, and the other arm pushes the head down to force the carotid artery into your wrist. In both submissions, force is being applied primarily into one side of the neck and secondary into the other side of the neck. In many chokes, to get one blade going up and one blade going down, you need rotational pressure. Let's dive into it. Let's look at the Darce, Anaconda, and Arm-in Guillotine to better understand this, and look at how choke bites apply. You need to put pressure on the soft part of the neck for a clean, all choke, no neck crank Darce. The key to a clean Darce is elbow positioning. The way you position your elbow will determine whether the pressure of your forearm is going to the hard part of the neck or the soft part of the neck. If your elbow is low, the pressure will go to the hard part of the neck and put pressure on the muscle. By raising your elbow up towards the armpit, your forearm will then be in line with the soft part of the neck. Your pressure has to go somewhere, and it's essential to make sure that you can feel the soft part of the neck before applying any pressure. You see this big gap here? This is a weak choke bite. A choke bite means to position the pivot point as close to the neck as possible, as well as angled correctly to hit the soft part of the neck. By lifting your elbow, you position your forearm parallel with the soft part of the neck and take away that gap. Taking away that gap creates a strong choke bite. When you enter into a Darce, you shoot your arm underneath their armpit and underneath their neck. Lifting up on the head will allow you to shoot your arm deep so you can take a strong grip on your bicep. But if you try to finish with a deep grip, you're going to be putting pressure on the hard part of the neck because the pivot point will be angled incorrectly. In this case, the pivot point is the inner elbow, which is why once your arm is deep, you need to retract your arm so that only your hand is peeking out behind your head. Retracting your arm for a shallow grip will allow you to raise your elbow to position your pivot point correctly. If your arm remains deep, your elbow will be unable to lift. And due to the angle of your elbow, the pressure will just go to the hard part of the neck. Once you have your arm retracted, you can now raise your elbow to take proper elbow positioning. Now you can squeeze. Squeezing will force your forearm into the neck, but this isn't enough. You must also force their neck into your forearm. It's a dual motion for maximum pressure. Back to the scissor analogy, it's one blade going up and one blade going down. It's not just one blade going up. You force their neck into your forearm by pushing their head down, while your forearm presses up. To do this, you need rotational pressure. Watch how both my elbows rotate, and my torso pushes down on the head. Force is being applied both up and down like scissors. If you only rotate, you'll just neck crank your opponent. And if you only squeeze, you likely won't be able to generate enough pressure to cut off blood flow. Doing both simultaneously will ensure it's a clean choke before it's ever a neck crank. Let's now look at the mechanics of the Anaconda choke. Elbow positioning is again essential for your pressure to go to the soft part of the neck. If your elbow is high, your pressure will just go to the armpit. Remember, the pressure needs to go somewhere, and the armpit is not where you want it. By positioning your elbow low towards the mat, you line up your forearm parallel the soft part of the neck. Now when you squeeze, your forearm will press into the carotid artery. To press their neck into your forearm, you need rotational pressure. You do this by pressing your chest into their head, rotating your body into them. Again, referencing the scissor analogy, it's one blade going up and one blade going down. Now let's look at the mechanics of the Arm-in Guillotine. For the Arm-in Guillotine, you grip hand over hand. 4 fingers over the blade of the other hand. The same grips as the front headlock itself. The only thing that differentiates the front headlock from the Arm-in Guillotine is if you're actually trying to finish with the guillotine or just using it for control. The way you want to position your grips for the Arm-in Guillotine is your opponent's neck just a little bit past where your hand rounds, the hard part of your wrist/forearm. And now you lift your wrist upwards to press it into the soft part of the neck. You should be able to feel the soft part of the neck. If you don't, you're likely too deep and will put pressure on the trachea and risk injuring the throat. Lifting your wrist up presses it into the carotid artery, but you also need to press the carotid artery into your wrist. And again, use rotational pressure to push their head down. Push your wrist into the soft part of the neck and push their head to force their neck into your wrist. From your guard, you need to be on your side to get rotational pressure. This will enable you to actually rotate. If you're on your back, it'll be tougher to rotate, but you can still push their head inward with your bicep. This does cause a little more discomfort for your partner, so I don't always like to finish like that.